let me take you back to 2001. The good days, the better days. An era where every single Final Fantasy was good. We didn't rank the games, start here, skip that, this one was when the series got bad, none of that. And no, Final Fantasy II isn't bad, you keep your trap shut. Until this point, we had it good. Too good. You see, we didn't realize it at the time because we were swayed by the giant evolutionary step it took. But Final Fantasy X, for all it got right, took several missteps, but people didn't view these as issues. That wasn't the case nearly a decade later, when 13 released. People were critical of the linearity, excessive cutscenes, and more, all of which didn't manifest out of the blue. The game Final Fantasy XIII shares the most in common with is 10, one of the most celebrated games in the series. But where Final Fantasy X succeeds is in charm. The tropical setting was a refreshing change of scenery for the series. The characters are likable. You don't want to beat the shit out of half of them. To this day, it's got the most satisfying ending of the entire series. So let's pretend like 10-2 is just bad fanfiction. That's redundant, isn't it? Is any fanfiction good? You can walk away from Final Fantasy X with a smile on your face, and that's priceless. I just wrapped up another playthrough, and even though you can't skip cutscenes, and some are so long I put the controller down to casually cook dinner, I've still got to admit, Final Fantasy X is good. It's really good. But the sphere grid is an abomination. I always had an inkling that it sucked, but I couldn't admit it, till now. With RPGs, people love having control over their level ups. Isn't that the entire point of the genre? D&D revolves around this. Demon's Souls and its successors wouldn't have enduring popularity if you couldn't create builds. Actually, that's not true at all. Apparently, difficulty is the only thing that matters there. And this is all well and good if you're working with small numbers, when each stat point has value, when equipment is reliant on stats, but when you're staring at a giant grid, where each node represents a marginal improvement, and your choices don't matter, and you're spending hours maneuvering across this damn thing, you're gonna reach a point where you stop to wonder, how much time could I have saved if this was automated? So, I broke out a calculator. We're working with the standard grid. There are 860 nodes, times 7 playable characters, equals 6020. But it's not enough to merely own a sphere and apply it to a node. You need to be on the node you want to activate, or the node in question needs to be directly adjacent to your active node. This figure doesn't include backtracking, but for the sake of simplicity, we're going to assume that the sphere grid is actually a sphere line, and you can take every node without retracing your steps. We're also going to assume optimal node activation here, meaning you work in threes. You activate 3 nodes, move on to the next batch, activate 3 more, and so on. We're also going to assume you can stock hundreds of reserve S levels and thousands of each sphere, so you don't need to constantly take breaks to farm levels and spheres because the cap is 99. All of this is impossible, by the way, and it doesn't factor in time spent inserting stat spheres into the many blank nodes, or using clear nodes to wipe useless preset ones away like magic defense +1 if you're going for a complete min-max to hell grid. Assuming impossible optimal conditions, it'd take roughly 13 seconds to activate 3 nodes. This takes into account moving to an empty node with 2 empty nodes flanking it, then activating all 3. So we divide 6020 by 3, then multiply by 13. This amounts to approximately 435 minutes, or roughly 7 hours and 15 minutes. Again, this math is wrong, this math is shitty, every single math teacher I've ever had would condemn me to hell for making a mockery of their profession. Which, to be fair, that's pretty funny and only makes me want to mess up more. And still, this wrong, shitty, impossible number is the lowest amount of time you could spend on the sphere grid if you want to max it out. But wait, I skipped a step. Remember, we're working with a combined total of 6020 nodes. This can also be read as 6020. 20 is 1/3 of 60, so when we divide by 3, it cancels out the 1/3 and becomes just 1. Why is this relevant? Because when we proceed to the next step, multiplying by 13, we don't have the appropriate number. We're instead multiplying 6020 into 13, which gives us 78,260. That's a suspicious looking number, isn't it? Take the 26 and it divides neatly into 78, becoming 3. What does that mean? Well, if we attach it to the 1 from earlier, we get 13. we're also taking 13 seconds for optimal sphere activations, and look at that, 13 divides cleanly into 26 as well. But what about that 0 we just obtained? Take that, attach it to the 1, and we're left with 10. Final Fantasy X. The sphere grid and crystarium are more connected than you might think. Do you want to max the grid out? I don't mean you personally, I mean you in general, you the people. And no, you don't need to, not even to kill the hardest boss. The only purpose maxing it out serves is if you want a trophy from the remastered version. Can we talk about trophies for the next hour and how utterly pointless they are? Maybe another time. I don't care about trophies. I'd rather spend 30 hours making a video complaining about the sphere grid than trying to fill it out. So let's approach this from a practical stance. You finish a battle, everyone gets an S level or 2, and now you've got a choice. Waste time going into the menu to see if you can use that S level to get a brand spanking new empty node that doesn't do jack shit, or if you're lucky, an accuracy node, ooh. Or bank that S level until you've got 4 or 5 so you can actually have a productive sphere grid session and you're not constantly going in and out of the menu for negligible stat gains. But that also means you get to stare at those tantalizing levels every time you complete a battle or open the menu. The joy of gaining levels is lessened because you're sitting on them, waiting for a good opportunity to finally make that level up real. This system replaces one juicy level up with tons of micro level ups. Is it satisfying to finally go on a shopping spree and activate dozens of nodes at once? We'll get into that in a bit, but it doesn't make up for the frustration of seeing one character ready to level up because he's flooded with S levels, but not anyone else. And that's all this system is. It takes an intermittent reward, a level up, and makes it more common because the thought is that providing the player with a constant stream of rewards will keep him hooked longer. Gachas take this concept to the extreme. It's addicting in the same way that smoking a pack of cigarettes is addicting. Japan is one of the only remaining first world countries that still normalizes smoking. That's not true, but just go with it. They have giant glass boxes in malls and on the street where people can gather to huff each other's fumes. They have cigarette vending machines. The series' creator was an avid smoker himself. Why do you think he named an enemy after Marlboro tobacco products? The sphere grid wouldn't be so bad if it weren't so cumbersome, if I wasn't going in and out of the menus constantly. This tedium isn't rewarding because everyone shares the same grid, so if everyone maxes it out, they're all acquiring the exact same stat gains and abilities. Every character can do everything, with the only thing separating them being their weapons and overdrives, which aren't factored into the sphere grid. So I'm not creating a build, I'm choosing which gains to prioritize, and the more you play the game, the less these choices matter. Just to beat the game with minimal grinding, sure, everyone will end up unique. Yuna will be your dedicated white mage, Lulu the black mage, you get the point. This isn't new to Final Fantasy X. 3, 5, and Tactics all allowed for much more flexibility with their job systems. These were specific jobs, not vague suggestions through stat and ability distribution. The sphere grid takes each job and splits it into pieces. It's like a deconstructed meal. Ooh, look at all these ingredients. You can make your own salad. No, how about you just serve me a fucking salad? With the standard grid, you'll naturally reach the end of the game at around the time you reach the end of each character's grid, meaning that multi-job flexibility only comes into play if you're gonna partake in the post-game. Either that or an excessive amount of grinding. If you're not gonna force me to branch out and specialize these roles with different abilities, why even have a grid at all? Might as well just use a traditional level up system like the series used to use. Here's how you level up in past games. Well, that was easy. Now I'm a bit stronger, except I didn't need to muck about on a grid for several minutes to make that a reality. I can freely move my materia around to customize my roles, rather than inch towards a spell node on a grid. It's immediate, more convenient, and the limited materia slots means characters need to specialize their role. They can't do everything. Your choices are more meaningful. The sphere grid's primary flaw can also be seen in the original release of Final Fantasy XII. The original license board let each character do everything. There's no specialization. This is why the International Zodiac job system forced each character to take on a permanent role, with smaller, personalized grids. You can still choose the order in which you proceed through a grid, but once it's maxed out, that character is still distinct from the rest. Then Zodiac Age let you take on hybrid jobs, then later releases let you change your job at will, yada yada, we're not getting into that. Final Fantasy X, with its international version, did little to fix the balancing issue. All the expert grid does is it allows each character to choose their specialization from the start, like Kimahri with the standard grid. Yuna doesn't have to be a white mage for the first dozen hours until you get key spheres. She can proceed down a physical-oriented path. No idea why you'd want to do that, but the option's there. This is an improvement. You can play the game with different builds each time if the only thing you're interested in is blitzing through the main story. But once you reach the post-game, everyone is still sharing the same enormous grid, so they'll obtain the same abilities and stat gains in the long run. The only difference is there are less nodes to work with. I would have praised this system if it functioned similar to how Path of Exile does. Path of Exile starts you in the center of this massive web, and you slowly branch out, acquiring passives to develop a build. But there's a limit to the number of level ups. You can't acquire every node. If Final Fantasy X employed this limitation with the expert grid and removed the blank nodes, problem solved. Your choices would matter, and I wouldn't be here. Remember not too long ago when I was comparing this game to Final Fantasy XIII? Well, la-di frickin' da, look at that! The sphere grid makes its return, except now it's called the Crystarium. Follow a line of nodes until you reach Grand Pulse, when class specialization is thrown away, because now everyone can take on any role. Hope can be a commando. It's as stupid an idea as it sounds, but it's possible. Two aspects make this worse than the sphere grid. Your ability to level through the Crystarium is physically gated by story progression, and you can't delete and insert nodes to your liking. I don't know how a game in this series released nearly a decade after 10 manages to do the same thing but worse, but here we are. So what does the sphere grid do right? By itself, nothing. But because acquired levels must be spent, this system inadvertently lets you rebalance the game. You can perform a no sphere grid run. You can choose when to stop acquiring nodes on the grid. If you want to only acquire abilities and skip out on stat gains, you can do that. For challenge runs, the sphere grid's flexibility shines. But how many people are going to play like this? Realistically, most players want to engage with the sphere grid, which entails frequent breaks in whatever it is you're doing to go through each character and level up once or twice. At best, it's a new spell or HP up, maybe strength or magic +4, but oftentimes it's evasion +1, defense +1, or nothing at all. Talk about a total buzzkill when you're peering down your intended path and see that the next 6 or 7 level ups are trash. You see a strength node, hover over it, and it's just strength +1. Cutting the size of the sphere grid by 50% and doubling the potency of each stat boost would have felt more impactful. Do I need to break out the calculator again? Let's break out the calculator again. If you've been paying attention, which I don't blame you if I lost you at some point, but if I didn't, you might call me a hypocrite for enjoying Final Fantasy XII's license boards while hating 10's sphere grid. Am I a hypocrite? Yes, you win this one. But I do have one small defense. In Final Fantasy XII, license points move you around the board and unlock access to skills and spells, but they don't grant you those abilities. They have to be acquired elsewhere, like chests and merchants. Once you purchase the fire spell, it's available for everyone to use if they acquired the appropriate license. In Final Fantasy X, you don't buy the fire spell, you acquire ability spheres, which are generic keys to unlock anything that's located on ability nodes. In 12, if you unlock a license for a spell you don't have yet, that's fine. You gain immediate access once you do acquire that spell. In 10, if you skip over an ability node because you don't have an ability sphere, uh-oh, you're fucked. Now you've got to spend S levels to backtrack, except there's no uh-oh, because there's never a moment when you're not flush with spheres. If this system actually wanted you to make difficult choices, it would restrict the rate that you acquire spheres. I'm never in a position where I need to decide, do I wait here until I get an ability sphere to get this skill, or do I skip it for now and spend S levels to come back later? The vanilla release was kinda balanced in this regard, because it didn't have the extract skills. If you ran out of ability spheres, you had to farm monster drops. But because that game only has the standard grid, you have less choice in character growth overall since they're following their linear grids. Every version since International has extract and distill skills, so just use extract ability if you're running low on ability spheres, which is the only one you're in danger of running out of, and even then, only in the early game. But you won't run out of spheres. It doesn't happen, because you'll max out your sphere inventory without even trying, just from random drops, and if you're unlucky, you can use the extract skills, or just apply these distill skills to your weapons. So this resource is next to pointless. It's effortless to acquire, and it slows down moving through the grid because now you need to activate every single node with spheres. Everything about the sphere grid is slow. The devs took a simple system and thought making the process more involved, that somehow made it better. Final Fantasy II had more depth in 1988 by judging character growth based on your actions in battle, not by playing Light Bright every 5 minutes. Look, Final Fantasy X is a special game. I own every single Western release of it. When I first saw my cousin playing the game when it was brand new, I was interested in buying it specifically because I thought the Sphere Grid looked like the coolest shit ever. Having played the game enough times over the past 20 years, the only thing that frustrates me still isn't the unskippable cutscenes, it isn't dodging 200 lightning bolts, chocobo racing, Seymour Flux, Blitzball. Okay, I still think Blitzball is an abomination, but whatever. Just get past the tournament and you're done. But the Sphere Grid? Unless I'm doing a challenge run, there's no avoiding it. It was a huge mistake and a serious blemish on an otherwise beautiful game. I'm exaggerating, of course, before you get your panties in a twist. The Sphere Grid is a small annoyance, nothing more. Just kidding, it sucks. Have a great day!